Hello, my friends. Welcome to video 2 of the How to Homeschool Roadmap process. My name is Janae Daniels. I'm the host of the School to Homeschool podcast. We are not long-term homeschoolers. I pulled my kids right before 2 of them were about to go into high school. I have 2 adult kids who went through public school. And so I'll share my story in just a moment. Before I get into the video on how to deschool and our story and all of that good stuff, if you like this video, or if you're listening to it on an audio platform such as Spotify or iTunes, please like and subscribe. It helps get this kind of content out there to other families who need it. And y'all, with as many people who are leaving the school system to homeschool, there are a lot of people who need it. And I'd like to help as many people as possible so it won't be quite as painful as it was for our family. Now, in this video, I'm going to tell you our story, and I'm going to explain what deschooling is. We're going to discuss a little bit about the history of the education system because that is very imperative as you're going through deschooling, which nobody told me. We're going to discuss the ideas around education that we've accepted as correct and truth, so that we can let go of some of those ideas and those notions. And then we're going to talk about don'ts as you deschool and the do's, the things that you're going to actually do as you deschool. So before I get into the story, though, we have preconceived ideas about education and learning, and they're deeply entrenched in our culture and in our society. And unfortunately, these ideas hinder us as we try to move into a homeschooling lifestyle. And homeschooling is definitely a lifestyle. It's not just a practice, but it becomes very much a lifestyle. But these ideas, these preconceived ideas tend to limit us as we start homeschooling and tend to cause a lot of people anxiety. And so we have these ideas and we think that these are normal thoughts and ideas. And we're going to get into what those ideas are a little bit later in the video. But this is what we were taught. And so we've come to accept it as just the way things are. The thing is that, as we'll discuss, many of these ideas and these notions were very carefully engineered and implemented in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And I think of these ideologies as shackles that are on our brains that we need to remove. And so the deschooling process is, in my opinion, is the process of removing some of these shackles, removing some of these ideas about what education and learning should look like versus really what it is. And so we're going to talk about what those ideas are and the whole deschooling process. One of the things, again, before we get into it, that I wish someone would have told me was that I would go through the stages of grief. And so as I started homeschooling and then realized that we needed to deschool, and I'll tell you our story in a second, I started experiencing I started going through the grief cycle. And I thought that there was something wrong with me because I was feeling all these feelings and emotions. And what I've come to know with working with a lot of families that I've helped transition out of the school system, especially with older kids, is that it's totally normal to go through the grief cycle. Not only you go through it, but your older kids may go through it as well. And so that is part of the deschooling process, is going through the grief cycle, going through the 7 stages of grief, of shock and denial and pain and guilt and anger and bargaining and depression. And then there's an upward turn and then a reconstruction and working through things and acceptance and hope. You'll find that you'll go through these in different stages, even things like you're starting the, schooling at the beginning of the year, homeschooling at the beginning of the year, and you see families walking back to school or driving their kids back to school, and you drive past and you suddenly feel anxiety around that and you want to vomit. Like, nobody told me that I would experience that. And I did for like 3 years. Every year, like school would start back up and I'd be like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm just, but know that, anticipate that you may go through that. You may go through the grief cycle, and it's totally, totally normal. Okay. So with that, this is going to be a longer video, but I want to be as helpful as possible. Again, when I started homeschooling, I couldn't find anybody who pulled their kids right before high school, which is the whole reason I started my podcast, because I kept getting calls from people about like, how do you do this? I'm pulling my junior from in high school from public school, and I'm going to throw up, and I feel like some of the information, it's well intended by longtime homeschoolers about deschooling, uh, is, well, it's not always great because, I don't know. I found some of the things not helpful as somebody pulling older kids. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's get started. I'm going to share my screen here because I made some visuals for you. Oops, not that one. Here we go. Okay, deschooling. What is it and how do we do it? As I mentioned, I'm Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, a host of the School to Homeschool podcast. By the way, if you want lots more information, I go into a lot more depth and insight and give you as much as I can through the podcast. And starting with episode 1, I take you through like our journey, which I'm about to tell you a brief version of our story and our journey. And I cover a myriad of subjects in the podcast. But the whole point of the podcast is to help those of us who are pulling kids, especially older kids, is to help you through the whole process. So there is the podcast there for you as a reference. I also have a website, schooltohomeschool.com, with lots of resources and different things for you to help you, and a newsletter that I send out regularly to help you in the transition process, because it doesn't have to be scary and you don't have to go it alone. I am a former public middle school teacher, which I found was not helpful when we started homeschooling. People are like, oh, you'll do great with homeschooling because you were a former middle school teacher. No, it made things harder. And we'll talk about why. And I'm a learning junkie as well. I really love to learn. However, that got killed in public school for me. And I didn't even realize it until we started homeschooling. And I realized, oh my gosh, I really love learning. I actually didn't have a bad public school experience either. Like, it's not that I hate public school, because there is definitely a place for it, and there are families where it's a necessity. I get that. Right. So I'm not hating on public school. But once I did learn the history of it, I was like, oh, this is a little nefarious. Okay. But let's get into, there's the podcast tile if you need to see it. This is my family. This is a very old picture. This is my family. I have 6 kids. I've got 4 boys, 2 girls. Okay. We started homeschooling in August of 2020. I actually pulled my kids in July. Unlike a lot of homeschooling families, homeschooling was not on my radar ever. Maybe like for half a second, but really, I thought homeschooling families were weird. As a former public school teacher, I vowed I would never homeschool my kids. And all of that changed literally overnight. COVID hit. My kids finished out the school year. I honestly loved all my kids' teachers. Like, I never had issues in the school system with, well, okay, there was a couple teachers that I was like, eh. But in all the years that my older kids and then the rest of them were going through school, we had a really mostly good experience. There was some bullying with a couple kids, but a mostly good experience. The administrators were awesome to work with. Mostly, there was one that I was like, but mostly great experience with teachers. And I felt like when COVID hit, as we were hanging at home, and then the kids would go online with their poor teachers who had to figure out doing school online when they weren't trained to do that. And I felt like my kids' teachers did such an amazing job with the cards that they were dealt with. And so I was really proud of them and try to be as supportive as possible. In the meantime, during the rest of the time that the kids weren't doing the hour of online school or 20 minutes of online school, we had a lot of fun. Like, we started cooking, we started listening to audiobooks, we went on some hikes, we watched lots of documentaries and movies. Like, we had such a fun time. And I didn't realize that's in essence what we were doing was homeschooling. I didn't realize that. But again, the plan was in the fall, they were going to go back to school, hopefully, and go on. But in July, mid-July, of 2020, I ran into my kid's school principal and at Target, and I asked him what was going to happen because I hadn't heard anything from the school district. And I was heavily involved. Like, I was a room parent, for my younger kids. Like, I volunteered. I was heavily involved in the schools. And so I asked, I was like, I haven't heard anything from the school district. What's going on in the fall? And he's like, I have no idea. None of us do. And I was like, oh, okay. And there was hybrid learning. He was like, I don't know if it's going to be hybrid. I don't know if it's going to be in person. I don't know if it's going to be all online. We don't know. And I could appreciate that, right? Nobody knew what was going on then. None of us. And so I wasn't angry about that. I was frustrated, but not at the school or the administration or the teachers. I was frustrated with like the whole situation, as most people were. I was frustrated that there wasn't toilet paper. Thankfully, I had plenty, but everyone had frustration. So I had an experience, though. I'm a religious person. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. And a couple weeks went by. I guess it was like a week that went by, and I was sitting in church, and I had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to homeschool the kids. And it really jarred me because, again, it wasn't on my radar to homeschool them. But I couldn't, I went home from church that day. It was just a thought that came with, like, it was pretty powerful, that I needed to homeschool. And I approached my husband. He's like, I think it sounds great. We don't know what's going on anyway. Why not? I was a little concerned because I was working part-time online, and I had a child who was about to go into kindergarten. They were actually going to be in preschool one more year and then about to go into kindergarten. And I was like, I don't know how to teach reading. Like, I was I'm a secondary ed teacher, although legally I'm K through 12 licensed in the state of Colorado. My specialty is 6 through 12. And so I thought, how am I going to teach this child to read? What am I going to do about science? Like, all the things, like, there's no way I can homeschool. So I called all of the homeschoolers that I knew, all three of them, and they were all long-term homeschoolers. I'm like, I feel like I need to do this. And so, they tried to give some advice, but ultimately I didn't know what to do. And then the thought, it wouldn't go away. And I ultimately decided that we're going to take the plunge and homeschool. And I knew nothing about homeschooling philosophies. I knew very few homeschoolers. I was worried about socialization because I had heard and the only homeschoolers that I knew growing up, there was like 2 families, and I thought they were super weird. Which, by the way, since being in the homeschooling world, there's far more not weird ones than there are weird ones. The weird ones just tend to be the loudest. And it's actually not the homeschooling that makes them weird. It's the parents. Like, apples don't fall far from the tree. And if they were weird at homeschool, they'd be weird at school too. But I was really just, like, I couldn't shake it. And I was scared. And what I thought homeschooling looked like would be like doing school at home. Like, we have all these curriculums, and we sit for hours a day and we do the work. And I thought, I'm not a math teacher. Well, okay, what am I going to do? But ultimately, I made the, with my husband, we made the decision that we were going to homeschool at least for the first year. Maybe forever, maybe not. We didn't know. But it couldn't be any worse than online learning, right? That's what I supposed. And so I made the decision towards the end of July. I submit a notice of intent to homeschool to the school district, and that was the scariest part, honestly. Like turning in the paperwork, my hands were shaking, and I wanted to cry. It was very anticlimactic. The school district was like, "Okay, thanks," took it, and I'm like, I before I did that, I looked up all the laws to make sure I knew, what were the laws, because I wanted to stay compliant with all the state laws. So that's the very first thing I did. Then I submitted my notice of intent to homeschool, which is one of the things that you can do in the state of Colorado, which is where I'm at, to homeschool. Submit the paperwork, and I wanted to vomit. And then I went home that day and just started looking up like how to homeschool, and felt more confused than ever. I was like asking people like, what curriculum do I buy? What do I do? And then I spent an obscene amount of money on curriculums for all of the subjects, for all of the different ages and all of the subjects. At the time I had a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old, and both of them were about to turn 14 and 13. And then I had an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so I bought all the, I bought it all. I bought all the curriculums, and I spent so much money. My husband's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, we are going to homeschool and it's going to cost a lot. Sorry. We'll figure it out. We'll budget it," which, looking back, don't go out and buy curriculums. We're going to talk about that in a little bit later. So I planned it. I was like, on August 17th, we are going to start homeschooling. That's our start date. Y'all, I planned out a very strict schedule, which is funny because it's very not my personality. Very strict schedule for the day. We're going to do this subject first and this one second. This is what we're going to do, and it's going to be amazing. And so that day came, and I imagined myself as being Fraulein Maria and the children, in matching clothes made out of drapes. I even did a short about this, right? That legitimately is what I thought. I was scared, but I was like, it's going to be amazing. We're going to love it. And we're going to bake bread. And they're going to love all their curriculums. It's going to be amazing. And it ended up looking more like a mutiny. So we start August 17th. By an hour and a half into our little homeschooling journey, the kids were crying. I was sobbing, like ugly crying. The kids wanted to go back to public school. I also wanted them to go back to public school, and it was a disaster. I mean, that's an understatement. I mean, it was a mess, explosion, disaster. Like, it blew my mind how awful it was. And then something happened. Like, we were just like an hour and a half into homeschooling. Maybe it was 2 hours. It wasn't very far in, and it was a disaster and mutiny. And then there was a knock on the door, and I was homeschooling in the basement. And so I went upstairs, I opened the door, and I had totally forgotten that the piano tuner was coming. And my face was just blotchy and red, and I was trying to wipe off the snot from crying. And I opened the door, and he's like, "I'm here to tune the piano." And he was my friend's father-in-law. And so I'm like, "Come in, go ahead and get started." And I went back downstairs, and the kids are mad and they're upset and they're crying. And I was like, "You know what? We're just going to take a break and recompose ourselves, and we'll come back in 10 minutes and continue our lessons." And one by one, the kids go upstairs, and they don't come back downstairs. And I didn't really want them to come back downstairs. But then time went by and they didn't come downstairs. And I'm like, what is going on? Are they playing video games? So I ended up finally going upstairs, and y'all, this is what I saw. Now, for those of you that are listening to this and not watching it on YouTube or watching it on my website, this is the piano tuner, and the kids are surrounding him. They're totally focused on him. And my kids had gab phones. I learned the hard way, don't give kids smartphones with my oldest two. Life lessons learned. My younger kids had gab phones. All they can do is call and text. And they can only call and text certain people. But they can record. They can record stuff. And so you can see that in the picture. My daughter is recording the piano tuner. And what amazed me is that he's explaining stuff to them. Like he's tuning the piano and he's talking to them about what he's doing, and they're totally enthralled with this piano tuner. And he has the tuning forks, and he's explaining to them about sound waves, and he's explaining to them about how the piano works. And I watched this for a while, like a good half hour, I'm guessing is how long I was just kind of observing. And my daughter's recording him, and they're starting to ask him questions, and they're like, well, what about this? Well, what happens about this? Okay, so the shorter, thinner strings make higher notes. Okay, so that makes it a higher frequency. And he's like, yes, and they're just asking these really thoughtful science questions about sound waves and music. And at first I was pretty angry, embarrassingly enough. I was like, this is crap. They need to be downstairs learning from me and not up here wasting their time with the piano tuner. And then I stopped, and I was like, what? Wait a minute. Oh my gosh. They're totally learning, and no one is crying, and they're completely mesmerized by what he's saying to them. Maybe I'm missing the mark with what their education could be. And then I started reflecting on all the things that we learned during that time of that spring of COVID, of hiking and playing the ukulele and different things that we did as a family, and reading. And I'm like, maybe learning looks differently than I'm trying to do. Like maybe I'm trying to put a square peg in a round hole. So that the rest of the day, we mostly just played the rest of the time, and I had to stop. And that's when I called my friends, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what I did wrong, but I feel like learning could look different. And my homeschool friends are like, well, yeah, did you deschool your kids before you started homeschooling? Or during the process of homeschooling? I'm like, well, no, we just jumped into curriculum. So I'm like, oh, there's your problem. You should have deschooled first. I'm like, what is that? And they're like, it's literally when you do nothing, and you do nothing academic, and you just pretty much play. And it's your process of adjustment. And I'm like, what the heck? But we decided to take a step back and go through the deschooling process. Now, and I'm just going to go forward with this slide before I move on. That was not me. I was not Fraulein Maria. No, instead the piano tuner became Fraulein Maria, and they loved it. Okay. Now, before we get into deschooling, you have to understand there are two words that are in the homeschooling community that get confused all the time by those who are not in the homeschooling community. Deschooling and unschooling are two different things, very different things. Deschooling is the adjustment process between after you've pulled your kids to living a homeschool lifestyle, and then unschooling is an educational philosophy or methodology, also called child-led learning, which we will talk about that in the next video. But just know that they're not the same thing. They're different. Okay. So deschool, the official definition of deschooling is a period where you do very little formal work in order to recalibrate your child's natural love of learning. My definition of deschooling is the painful adjustment process of removing the shackles from our brains while taking our children's hearts and minds back and reawakening the wonder within them. What I've noticed is most kids, by the time they hit fourth grade, and I don't say all kids because there's some kids that love school. I say most kids because that seems to be the standard of all the children I've worked with through the years, as well as kids' friends and having lots of children. Fourth, fifth grade is when kids stop wanting to go to school. Like that's where the light goes out of their eyes and it becomes work and it becomes painful and they dread it. Like they like going to school for their friends and for their favorite subjects and for the elective courses, the enrichment courses like art and PE, and become kind of cynical towards core subjects like reading, writing, math, and such. And so deschooling is that adjustment process, and it's the process of learning to live a homeschooling lifestyle, which looks intensely different than public school. Okay. Like I said, it's the painful adjustment process of removing the shackles from our brains. Now, I say that very seriously because as I've come to learn, these ideas that I mentioned at the very beginning of the video really do become shackles for us. And so let's talk about the history of the system just a little bit so that you understand where these shackles come from. Now, it's interesting. This past summer, I saw the movie The Matrix for the very first time. I have never seen it. I watched it and I turned to my husband at the end of the movie and I said, that's how I felt when we were deschooling. Like I felt like I had taken the red pill and was seeing things for the first time outside of the Matrix. And he's like, yeah, that sounds about right. Okay. So let me introduce you to John Taylor Gatto. He was a public school teacher of 30 years in the New York school system. His remaining 2 years before retirement, he won New York City Teacher of the Year twice, the last 2 years. And then he won New York State Teacher of the Year his final year. And then upon his retirement, he wrote a scathing and painful op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal about how he felt like he had done a disadvantage to kids because of the public school system and being a teacher in it. He wrote several books. My two favorites are The Weapons of Mass Instruction and Dumbing Us Down. These books were super important for me as I was in the process of deschooling my kids. And he talks in extent about the history of our education system. Okay. So if you're going to start with anything, I would suggest, most people say start with Dumbing Us Down. I actually liked Weapons of Mass Instruction better, but he talks about the school system. And if you have a spouse or a family member that's like, why are you homeschooling? The school system is so great. Da, 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 da. Have them read his books. They will change their tunes very, very, very quickly. A lot of what he said really resonated with me as a former public school teacher. And I was like, yeah, no, this is true. That's true. That's true too. And it was like a gut punch every chapter, but it was really good for me. Okay. So let's talk about the history of the system again, because a lot of these preconceived ideas, which we're going to talk about, come as a result of the history of our system. Okay. So you have to understand, we didn't have any compulsory education laws in the United States until 1852. Horace Mann, who is touted as the father of the U.S. education system, scoured the world trying to find a system that would manufacture people who would do what they were told. And he settled and found it in the Prussian model, which was started in like 1814. It was after one of the wars that they had lost. And so they established a military training that would teach soldiers not how to think, but be taught what to think and learn to do what they were told and follow absolute orders. That was the system that he adopted. And so it was rejected by most of the states. And finally, he was able to convince Massachusetts, which is where, was what his state was, to adopt this Prussian model and start compulsory education. The intention was to take control away from the parents ultimately, and train children what to think. It was intended to separate families, which I didn't know. He does talk about this in Weapons of Mass Instruction, and he goes into like all of his sources. And then by the late 19th century, we have some of the titans getting into the education field with the intention of creating factory workers. And so we have this compulsory education that is meant to be a factory-esque type system that pumps out people who are workers. And it was never meant to enrich students, enrich their minds, and it progressively got worse. It starts in 1852 with Massachusetts, slowly other states adopt it. And then by the early 20th century, we have people like John Dewey and social scientists infusing ideologies into the system to train children to think certain ways, again with an intention to separate them from families, to learn to do what they were told, to be compliant to bosses. And we see this, and we're going to talk about this in some of the shackles and myths that we have around education that have become very ingrained, that we think are normal when in actuality, historically, they're not. And prior to 1852, people were homeschooling, and then they'd send their kids to common schools, which were essentially like, in the late 1600s, a law was passed, the Yield-Luder of Satan Act was passed, where if there was communities large enough that made up, I think it was 50 families or more, maybe it was 20 families, they had to hire someone to teach their children how to read. And so we do get common schools in the 1600s, 1700s, early 1800s. Most people are taught how to read at home, or they would go to a common school for a couple years to learn basic arithmetic, reading and writing. And then, and it wasn't like that. It was 8 hours a day. It was a few hours a day for a few months. But they were predominantly at home, and then they would learn trades, and they would learn, the different things by the time they're 12, 13, like Benjamin Franklin only went to 2 years of formal schooling. And then he went into the printing trade with his brother. And then by the time he's 16, he goes off on his own and moves to Philadelphia. And anyway, super fascinating. But we didn't have any like compulsory education laws prior to 1852. And yet, de Tocqueville, when he was an ambassador from France to the United States, comes expecting a bunch of country bumpkins and finds a country, a new country of very intelligent and educated people. Well, and he was shocked by it. You can read more about it in the Democracy in America. And he talks about it, that it shocked him. And then we get 1852, and progressively as people and as a nation, we get dumber and dumber and dumber and dumber as the years go by. Thank you to compulsory education. So let's talk about this a little bit. John D. Rockefeller comes late 19th century. And he says, I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. I had to chuckle because last night I was watching a video and a lady was talking about how the titans of today have their hands in everything, and how back in the 1800s that wasn't the case. And I had to laugh. I'm like, this is somebody who's not very educated on the medical industry, on the education industry, and on pretty much every other industry, because John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie had their hands in everything. So John D. Rockefeller sets up he's the founder of the General Education Board. And he says, I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers, because they needed people doing what they were told in their factories so that they could manufacture stuff. And by the way, this is when we see consumerism take over in our country. And we go from being a nation of creatives and creators to a nation of consumers, is all during this period. Okay. So I promise this is important that you understand this as you're going through the deschooling process. And we'll get to how to deschool in a minute, but it's important that you understand this. You have to remove the shackles from your brain, and it takes a while. So these are some of the shackles. Okay. You also have to understand that these people, Horace Mann, while he set up compulsory education laws, these people continued to keep their children at home to educate them. They kept their children at home to educate them. They did not send their children to the schools that they were setting up. Interesting. Okay, we have President Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president of the United States, who says we want one class to have a liberal education. That's the elites. Okay. We want another class, a very much larger class of necessity, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult manual tasks. Did you hear that? Everybody else would go to compulsory school, aka public school, to learn to perform difficult manual tasks, not to learn to think. We have Elwood P. Cubberley, Stanford's Dean of Education, Public School Administration, 1916. By the way, this is when they start implementing teachers' colleges, where you have to be a licensed, quote, a licensed teacher. This is when we start getting all of that, late 1800s, early 1900s, because they wanted to control what teachers taught, how they taught, what they did. He says our schools, in a sense, are factories in which the raw products or the children are to be shaped and fashioned into products to meet the various demands of life. It's the business of school to build its pupils according to the specifications laid down. Every manufacturing establishment that turns out a standard product or series of products of any kind maintains a force of efficiency, experts to study methods and procedure, and to measure and test the output of its works. Building pupils demands continuous measurement of production to see if it is according to the specifications and the elimination of waste in manufacture. Again, they wanted a conveyor belt education so that they could produce workers. He continues, each year, the child is coming to belong more to the state and less to the parent. By the way, we have a lot of these people are very entrenched in, by this period, into the ideas of Marxism. Okay, you need to understand that too. Okay, then we have Edward Ross. He's a sociologist and a social controller. He helps with the education system and setting things up and what's being taught and teachers' colleges, etc. Plans are underway to replace community, family, and church with propaganda, mass education, and mass media. Okay. All right. So let's talk about, so here we have some very nefarious things going on. Again, this really, for me, was mind-blowing and really shook me to the core, because I have always touted the need for stay in school and public education, and it's so great. And finding out that the purpose behind it was to dumb our children down and dumb me down and dumb my family down and separate families made me sick to my stomach, y'all. Okay, so let's talk about shackles to be removed. These are some of the things that were implemented and myths that have been sold to us as good things that are bad ideas, but we've come to believe that they're good. And you'll see that, especially as you enter into this homeschooling world, that people will say things and they'll push things thinking that they're good because they don't understand that there's shackles on their brains that were engineered to be there, because we are entrenched in a system that is now almost a couple hundred years old. Let's see, 100, it's almost 200 years old, right? That this has become ingrained in us, but it's not true. So here's some of the shackles. Here's the red pill. I'm about to give it to you. Here we go. Number 1, I am not capable of teaching my children. I am not a licensed teacher. Again, they engineered this teachers' colleges so that they could control the students. When for thousands of years, children were taught by their mamas and they were educated by their papas. And Benjamin Franklin only went to a common school for 2 years from the ages of 8 to 10. And yet he was brilliant. And he's not the only one. He is not the only one. We can look at Thomas Edison and George Washington, and we can look at all these other people, Albert Einstein, and all these geniuses that were taught by their uneducated mamas. And yet, look what happened. I'm not capable of teaching my children because I'm not a licensed teacher. Y'all, that's a shackle on your brain. That idea is a shackle. And by the way, one-on-one instruction will trump 1-on-32 instruction 100% of the time. When I was teaching school, I had 150 kids a day. 150 kids a day. There was no way I could meet all of the needs of all of those kids every day. But as a mom or a dad or a grandma or a grandpa, or if you're an auntie that's taxed with homeschooling these kids, you can, because it's one-on-one. And by the way, you know them better. You love them more. You have more invested with their outcome than any other person will, even the most well-intending teacher. And this is not a diss on teachers. They are overworked. They are underpaid. They are tired. Their class sizes are busting at the seams, and they are forced to teach to tests. So that's the first shackle you have to remove from your brain, is that you are not capable, because guess what? You are 100% capable. Number 2, you must be the knower of all of the things. That is a myth. Y'all, I outsource math. My kids do an online math program to learn math, and they're zipping through math and they're doing great. I am not a math teacher, but I don't have to be, because we live in the information age. YouTube University has taught me how to change my air filter on my car, right? Like, we live in the information age. You don't have to be the knower of all the things. And when you get into the homeschooling world, you learn very quickly that you can outsource. You can send your kids to enrichment programs where they do subjects that you're not good at. You can do co-ops with other parents who are, one might be good at science and one might be good at this and one might be good at that. And you can utilize the homeschooling community as resources for you. You don't have to be the knower of all the things, nor will you be, because the world has so much information. There is no possible way that any person can learn all of it, period. You don't have to be the knower of all the things. There's plenty of resources out there. Okay, number 3, children must learn certain things at certain ages. This was implemented by the school system. This was implemented early on that somebody decided that children must learn certain things at certain ages. Somebody arbitrarily said in 6th grade, kids need to learn about Greece and Rome. And then we get Common Core that like makes it even worse. All 4th graders must learn this at this time. All children must learn math at this time. The truth is, as human beings, we learn different things at different stages. Some children pick up math at a much earlier age. Some children it takes longer. Some children it takes longer to learn to read, and other children it doesn't. We learn, like as human beings, we learn at different paces and at different levels, and they don't need to learn all the same things at the same time. Peter Gray, who is Dr. Peter Gray, who wrote the book Free to Learn, talks about this. He's like, first of all, like he says, I'm going to butcher his quote, but it's, the world is so much filled with so much information. It's impossible for one person to learn even a slice in their lifetime. Why is it that we expect all kids to learn the same slice? Good question. Okay. It's a myth. It's a shackle that children must learn certain things at certain ages. They don't. Okay. Another shackle, some more shackles. Grades matter and they show progress. No, grades were done as carrots and sticks for extrinsic motivation to take away intrinsic motivation, to shove that down. Fascinating books to read on motivation. If you read the book Drive by Dan Pink, great business book author, right? He talks about this at the end of his book about the problems with grades. And there's lots of other resources to learn about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Y'all, grades are arbitrary. They don't matter. They don't. Now, if you're pulling your child from high school and you're like, I have to create a transcript for the child, and I for the transcript, I need to assign them a grade. Great. Work with them on that. Assign them a grade, but know for yourself that grades are arbitrary. They don't help kids at all. A lot of kids learn to, which was intended, that they work towards the grade as opposed to working towards learning. And then you've got those kids that don't care about grades and they end up failing everything. And then they're labeled as problematic, ADHD, all the things. And then they start to believe that they're stupid because they don't have good grades. And grades become the end as opposed to the means to the end. As opposed to it being a data point, it becomes the end all be all. But it doesn't really demonstrate any actual learning, right? It doesn't. Testing shows that a child is learning. That is a shackle. If I test this child and they don't do well in it, then they're not learning. Now, there are places for some tests, like my children will take some tests on math problems, and they're not really tests, but like they'll get math problems wrong. And that enables me to go back and go, oh, okay. So it looks like we need to learn a little bit more about, it looks like you're not understanding like this concept. So that's where testing can be helpful. But to say, okay, here's a multiple choice test. Can you regurgitate the things that I just said or what that this book said? It actually doesn't do any good for them because they might have learned something else. They might have gleaned something else. Now, are there some state laws that require you to do national and state testing? Yes, some states do require that. It's fine. What I found is that children who don't regularly test still do fine on those tests. Does that make sense? And a lot of times, they won't have test anxiety because it's not a normal thing that they do. They go in and it's just, but it's a shackle to believe that testing actually shows that a child is actually learning anything. It's not. It's only showing that they can regurgitate information, except for in the cases of parts of math where you go, oh, okay, I see where you're not understanding this concept. Let's go back and work on this until you master the subject. That's, again, a thing with grades where I'm like, if my kids get stuff wrong, I'm not like, well, you got a 70. Let's factor that in. And I'm like, no, we're going to work on this until you understand the concept, and then we'll move on. Okay. Next thing, it's right for children to be with peers all day. This idea of socialization, like they're not going to be socialized if they're not with their peers all day. This is actually a 200-year construct. My friends, prior to this, children of all ages interacted all the time, and it's not natural in the real world. Think about this. When you went into the real world, when you went, for those of you who went off to college or trade school or just started working, how many of you were with peers your exact same age? I'll tell you, for me, when I went to college, I was an 18-year-old at college, and I was in college with non-traditional students that were in their 40s. I was in college with students that were in their late 20s. I was with married people. I was with single people. I like I wasn't with all other 18-year-olds. There were some 18-year-olds in my grade, like in my classes, but that wasn't the norm. Like everyone wasn't. And when I went into the workforce, I wasn't with all other people my exact age. It's actually stifling for them to be with peers all day, with their exact same age peers. One thing that amazed me is watching homeschooling families. Like, I love this. This happened a couple years ago. My kids do what's called an enrichment program on Fridays. So they go all day to one program, and the program is like, for my daughter, it's my 16-year-old. She goes to an arts program where every Friday they work on a show that they're going to be doing at the end of the year, and they work on the costumes and the sets, and it's grades 9 through 12 for this particular program, the show that they're working on. And then the same program has stuff for younger kids, the K through third grade, and they have a mixture of kids. And so the kids are in mostly mixed ages. So I went to this picnic for the whole thing, because it's quite a large enrichment program. I went to their picnic that they had at the end of the year, and I was amazed because the teenagers were all playing volleyball and face painting all of the younger kids. And it was totally natural. Like, they didn't go off and just become cliquey little groups. And then the kid, like, all of the ages were playing together. And that was normal. Like, that's normal in the homeschooling world. That's normal historically for thousands of years. But due to compulsory education, that's not been normal for the last 200 years. Now we see multi-age mixing as being weird, when in fact it's been the typical thing for thousands of years, up until we see this advent of compulsory education. Well, and it's not even until the 20th century that we start seeing like the division of ages and grades and kids into grade levels, because they had the one room schoolhouse up until like the 1920s, where the kids were all mixed. So again, a little bit nefarious, but it's not like that was a shackle that had to be taken off my brain. My kids have friends that are much older and much younger, and everything in between. And by the way, they still have their public school friends too. Okay, we need to know all the subjects prescribed by the education system to be well-rounded. Okay, that was totally done on purpose so that no children would deep dive into subjects. Again, they're trying to create a conveyor belt education system that pumps out workers that will do what they're told. And we still see that. We see that in the workforce. Okay. If I homeschool, my child will not go to college. Totally a myth. Every homeschooler that I can think of, and I know a lot of them now, all of their kids have gone to college. Well, some of them gone to trade school, but not problems getting into colleges. You do have to prepare based on what the different universities you want to apply for, look for. Like in the high school years, you prepare them for that, but totally not true that you can't get into colleges. As a matter of fact, on my podcast, I interviewed a girl who's a junior at Harvard, and she said that admissions told her when she was in her interview phase that they preferred homeschooling kids because they could think on their own and didn't always, like, they were able to be free thinkers and didn't do what they were told all the time. Like, that they were able to think, which I thought was really fascinating. So yes, your kids can go to college. Like it all depends on the college requirements, and then you prepare for that. Okay. Totally a myth, but people perpetuate that myth all the time because they don't know. Next one, schooling should take hours. Another shackle. Schooling, education does not take hours. And it's a myth that the longer that the more hours that they have, that the more they learn. Totally not true. My children, and you think about this in the public school system, how much time is wasted. Like between classes and right, transition periods, like actual education doesn't take that long. Like learning the core subjects, my kids spend like 15 minutes on math and they zip through it. I have a 12-year-old who's in geometry right now, and he zips through his lessons, where in the school system they have to go at the pace of the slowest person. And even then, sometimes if the slowest person's too slow, they just keep going. But they have to keep a pace, and they're required to keep a pace, and they have to fit all the subjects in. And so it takes them hours. When in homeschooling, really it only takes a couple hours. Shocker. And every person that I've helped leave the system is like, whoa, it blew my brain how fast this was. And then I felt guilty that it didn't take us that long. But you also have to remember that schooling doesn't always look like bookwork. Oh, no. Think about the piano tuner, right? My kids were learning all about sound waves, and there was not a textbook involved. There was not a desk involved. There was not a workbook involved. But yet, if you ask my kids about sound waves now, they can still tell you what they learned 4.5 years ago. Okay, so it doesn't need to take hours, can be super fast. Okay, subjects should be taught individually. This is another shackle that, again, all of these things were instituted, they were manufactured, they were engineered to create factory workers, to create people who would not think on their own. And so one of the things that they did do is they separated the subjects, whereas in life, subjects are integrated, right? Music involves math. Music involves science. Subjects are integrated, but by separating the subjects, it causes confusion in the brain for the kids, which I didn't know that until I started deep diving into the history of the system and found out that's one thing. But like, let's say you go to the zoo with your kids and you watch them feeding the animals. You're learning about science. You are learning about math as they taught, as like, they're like, oh, these animals require this much and they weigh that much. And, this is how much food they get. Like the subjects are integrated. When you cook, you're doing science and you're doing math and you're also doing art, right? Like, so you have to understand like that shift in, it has to look like this. The subjects have to be separated. You can take that out of your brain, right? That's a shackle you can take off your brain. Learning must involve a textbook, worksheets, and a desk. Usually it doesn't. Now, do some kids love worksheets? Sure. Yeah, fine. Use them. But learning doesn't have to involve that. Think back on the piano tuner. Didn't use a textbook, didn't have worksheets, they weren't sitting at a desk, and yet they can tell you about sound waves 4.5 years later. My kids will not have any friends if they aren't in school. They will be weird. What shocked me was that the homeschooling community, like my kids ended up making more friends. This is the one thing that's a little bit trickier is when you send them to school, they're surrounded by kids, but that doesn't necessarily enable them to make friends. When my daughter, who's now 16, when we pulled her little best friend at school's mom called me a few weeks later and she's like, my daughter, like your daughter was my daughter's only friend and now she has no friends, right? And she's in a school of hundreds of kids. The thing with homeschooling is you do have to, as a parent, like make efforts to get them in extracurricular activities, make efforts to enroll them in co-ops or enrichment programs. And so there's more effort on your behalf, but it's okay. And what you'll find is if you have multiple kids, a lot of times they start to become friends with each other. Not always, but a lot of times they become friends with each other. And it's really beautiful to watch. Okay. Homeschool kids don't get into college. I repeated that. And there's more shackles. That's the blue pill. Okay. That's staying in the matrix. That's these ideas they're ingrained in us. And so now during this time that we start to homeschool, we're going to have to remove some of those shackles. Again, you're going to go through the grief process. You're going to cry. You're going to have anxiety. Totally normal. It's okay. And people are going to challenge you because they haven't taken the red pill, because they're still in the matrix. Okay. So let's talk about the red pill. In deschooling, there's 4 objectives that we're going to work on. Okay. 4 things that we want to do while we deschool. The first thing is we want to reestablish relationship and connection with our kids. We want to get their hearts back. It has become a belief in our society. Again, this is another shackle, by the way, that as teens get older, that they rebel against their parents and they push away. That's actually false. You can have teenagers that don't rebel. In the book, Hold On to Your Kids by Dr. Gordon Neufeld, he is an attachment psychologist. He's a world-renowned attachment psychologist. He discusses peer orientation versus parent orientation, where it's very unnatural for children to want to be with peers all the time. Like historically, it's unnatural. It's only been in the last 4 generations that we see a shift and this advent of adolescents and their own culture, which again, now we're 40 years in and we think that's, or 4 generations in and we think that's normal. With homeschooling, we want to take their hearts back. We want them to have a strong connection and relationship with us as parents, with their family. Okay. And it's possible to do. I didn't think it was possible, and it is. So that's the first thing that part of the deschooling process is reestablishing that relationship, that connection. Number 2 is to remove shackles off your own brain. Okay. And off the brains, and you're going to have to help your teenage kids because they've got the shackles on too. By 4th and 5th grade, those shackles are on their brains. And we just talked about all those shackles. Number 3, we want to help them heal from trauma. Y'all, I cannot tell you how many parents have messaged me about bullying that's happened to their kids from peers, sometimes tragically, even from some of the adults and the teachers in their school. Kids who have come to believe that they're stupid, kids who have come to believe that there's something wrong with them and they need meds because they're wiggly and they're boys and they're kids, or they're, or they're stupid because they're not good at math because they didn't understand the way that their teachers taught it, right? There is tremendous trauma that they have to heal from. And the deschooling process is part of that is to help them heal. And then number 4 is to help reawaken their natural wonder and give them the time and space to discover and rediscover their interest and rediscover that they were meant to create, that they were meant to be curious, that they were meant to love learning, right? It's in us to love learning. And unfortunately, they've been taught that it's drudgery. Okay. So, most long-term homeschoolers will say, when you deschool, you literally do no academic work. You just play with the kids and you have fun and you do cool things. And yes, that's true that you do cool things. What I found to be very, very, very problematic is that when you pull your kids when they're older to go from heavy academics to no academics makes you want to hurl and causes a lot of cognitive dissonance, causes a lot of anxiety. And so just going cold turkey, I found that I couldn't do that. I found that to be very bad advice. But it's true, you want to do very few academics, okay? And I've limited it to you do every day for several months, you're going to do reading, writing, and a little bit of math, and you're not even going to do very much of it. Like we're talking like 10 minutes of each subject tops, And so to start off your deschooling journey, what you're going to first do is I want you, because you want to acknowledge your kids, the things that they're going to miss and the things that they're not going to miss, because this is a transition for them. This is a transition for you. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have them list everything that they're going to miss about school. They might miss their friends. They might miss certain subjects. They might miss playing soccer at lunch or whatever. So have them acknowledge the things that they're going to miss. Then number 2, I want you to have them list out things that they won't miss about school. Now, as I've had parents do this exercise, stuff has come up that was heartbreaking for some of these parents, that they had no idea what was going on with their kids. One mom told me that her 13-year-old daughter, on the list of things that they wouldn't miss about school, included, I won't miss eating lunch in the bathroom. And her mom said, why would you eat lunch in the bathroom? And how long has this been going on? And her daughter said, for 2 years. She would go into the lunchroom and she had no friends. And then there were some kids who made fun of her. So she would take her lunch into the bathroom to eat her lunch for 2 years. She said, Mom, I will never miss that. It broke that mom's heart. And when they get tempted to say, maybe I do want to go back to school, because they'll be like, oh, maybe I want to go back to school. You just say, do you remember when you were eating lunch in the bathroom? And it takes your kids back to go, oh, yeah, I don't miss that. I forgot how bad it was. They'll remember the good, but they have a hard time remembering the bad. Okay. And then the third thing that you want them to do, for some kids, this is really tough, because it's kind of been beaten out of them that they have their own interests, is you write down things that they want to learn about. Do they want to learn more about Minecraft? Do they want to learn about coding? And I'm not talking like, do they want to learn more math? What things interest them? Do they want to learn about horses? Do they like fairy tales? Do they want to learn more about mythology? What things are interesting to them? And have them write those things down, because then you have a little bit of a springboard during the deschooling process and after to work in some of those things that they're interested in and to awaken wonder within them again. Okay. So do not start buying, you learn the state laws, don't buy curriculums, my friend. Don't do it. You'll need to learn the philosophies. In the next video, we'll talk about different homeschooling methodologies and philosophies and ways that you can homeschool. And that will dictate whether or not you even buy curriculums. Okay. Don't go start buying curriculums. Number one, you're going to spend a lot of money, and you might buy some and then be like, oh, it worked for that family, and we're one lesson in, and I just spent $200 on this, and they hate it and I hate it, and now we're out that money. Don't start buying curriculum. Do not check your public school state standards. Homeschooling laws, yes. Homeschooling standards, yes. Know those, but don't look up the public school standards, because they most likely will be different. And they will cause you anxiety and they will freak you out. Don't go there. Look up the homeschooling laws, but don't look up the public schooling standards. Most of the time, they're very, very different. Let me give you for instance. In the state of Colorado, if I look at 4th grade state standards for 4th grade, I have 400 pages of expectations and requirements of things that the children in 4th grade are supposed to learn, and hundreds of pages. Right? I did that and I wanted to vomit. And then I went to the homeschooling standards, and it was literally one paragraph for all of the grades. And it was children must learn reading, writing, math, science, government, constitution, and I think it was oral speaking. I'm missing one. History. That's it. It doesn't dictate when and how, and there's a lot of freedom. Okay. There's far more freedom for homeschoolers than you think there is. Okay. And then do not expect to do hours of book work a day. You will have a mutiny on your hands. You will hate your life. And then you will say, I should probably send my kids back to public school. Don't do that. The next one, do not turn your house into a public school. There is no need for you to spend money on desks when you have a kitchen table, a couch, a floor, and the stairs. Now, there's lots of homeschooling influencers on Instagram who have the most beautiful homeschooling rooms you've ever seen. And you're going to feel anxiety and be like, I don't have any more space. What am I going to do? Do I transform my garage into a homeschooling space? No, y'all, you have a couch, you have a kitchen table, you have a floor, you have stairs, like my kids will study on the stairs sometimes. That's all you need. Do you have somewhere that they can sit and read? Then you're good. Kitchen table works. Don't worry about your child getting behind. Behind who and behind what? And by the way, if you're in a situation where like, I have to put them back into public school for whatever reason, most likely they won't be behind. They'll be ahead. But number two, even if they are behind, they can get caught up pretty stinking quickly. So, because I've seen that happen where they're like, oh my gosh, I have to take a job and I can't homeschool anymore or whatever. I've seen things happen where parents had to put their kids back in for some reason. And then they were surprised at how far ahead their kids were. And in one case, their child was behind and it took them like less than a month to get the child to get caught up. So don't worry about them being behind. They are where they are. Don't worry about grades, testing, and quizzes other than whatever the state law dictates. So if you have to worry about like taking a national test or, a state standardized test, that's the only time you're going to worry about it. Or if they're in high school and you need to assign them a grade for their high school transcript that you're creating, that's the only time you're going to really worry about grades and quizzes. But beyond that, you don't need to worry about like, oh my gosh, I have to grade them. I have to, what am I going to do? Just let it go. Let it go. Let it go. Take off the shackle. Here we go. Here are the things that you're going to do. Again, you're moving into the homeschooling world. You're going to do very little in the form of formal academics. In just a second, I'm going to talk about the formal academics that you are going to do. But it's not going to look like you're replicating school at home, because learning doesn't necessarily look like textbooks. Okay. You think about how you learn, right? If you want to learn something, you will learn it. I had to change the air filter on my car. By golly, I learned it in 20 minutes. Thank you to YouTube University, how to change the air filter on my car. And it did not require me to use a textbook. Okay. You do want to focus on putting the relationship first. Relationship comes before everything else. It comes before academics. It comes before everything else. Your objective is to get their hearts back. It's like, put that relationship first and be very patient with them. Do meet them where they are. If they were failing in algebra and you pull them out of the school system, do not stick them back into algebra. Take some time to discover where they were struggling and why. And then as you do have them do some math, meet them where they are. I just worked with a family who pulled their kids at the end of this last year, and this was the situation. This is the exact situation. This is real. Daughter's a sophomore in high school, struggled with math her whole life, took her out of algebra. She was failing. They kept moving her on, kept failing. School system kept moving her on, kept failing. Starts homeschooling. Her mom is like, okay, let's start with algebra. No, we can't start with algebra. Where are you struggling? Finds that she struggles with division. Goes back and she's like, is it wrong that I'm putting her in 4th grade math? I said, no, not at all. Puts her in 4th grade math. She zips through it in a few weeks. And suddenly, guess what she can do? She figured out the algebra. Why? Because that mom took the time to meet her where she was, and instead of forcing her to be at grade level with her peers, took the time to meet her where she was, figured out where she was struggling, and then she was able to speed up. What? As a mom, you can do that. Okay, do slow down. I love the saying, We slow down to go smooth. And when we go smooth, we end up going fast. Okay, but slow down. You can sleep in. You can adjust your schedule to fit the needs of your family when you homeschool. That's the beautiful part of homeschooling. Do you have kids that like to sleep later, that need more sleep? Great. They can sleep later if that's part of your family culture, right? You want your homeschool to revolve around you and your family culture and the needs of your family and your children. And you can slow way down, and it's beautiful. You don't have to wake up at 6 a.m. and rush out the door by 7 to get them to school. You could start school at 10 o'clock. You could start school at 1 o'clock. It doesn't really matter. It's your homeschool. Okay, do read aloud together. This is something that totally shocked me in the homeschooling world. Parents don't stop reading to their kids as soon as their kids can read. They continue to read to them into high school. And y'all reading aloud, as I've joined this magical Harry Potter thing world we call homeschooling, reading aloud into teen years is totally a staple for most homeschooling families. And the research done about reading aloud astounded me. So this is something that you're going to want to do every day with your kids, or try to do every day. Maybe it doesn't happen every day. At first, there's going to be a mutiny. They're going to push back. Find a great, interesting book to read and read aloud with them. Start with 5 minutes. Maybe you get an audiobook. That's fine too. And you listen to it as you have dinner, or you listen to it as you're cooking, or whatever. But take the time during this deschooling period to read aloud together. Again, start with a few minutes and then just work your way up. While you're in the car, pop in an audiobook. One of my family's favorite series of all times. It doesn't matter if they're in their 20s or if they're 8 years old. The Great Brain series by John D. Fitzgerald is hysterical. We listen to it on Audible books. So funny. It's so funny. Also, anticipate like lower reading levels for kids. And if the book's not working for your family, by the way, move on, choose a different book. No one says you have to finish the book. Okay. So read aloud together. Okay. Now, again, longtime homeschoolers will say, don't do any formal academics at all. And those of us leaving the system cannot do that. We freak out. So I'm telling you, just for your own sanity and for your own anxiety levels, these are the three academic things that you are going to do every day, or a little bit each day, or maybe you do it 3 times a week, or maybe you start with one of them and then you just slowly increase, but do a little bit of math each day. So cooking counts. If you want to have them do formal math, use Khan Academy, or go on YouTube and have them watch, a math video or two. Have them measure stuff. For the older kids, again, Khan Academy is free. You could say, okay, every day you just have to do like a 5-minute lesson, 10-minute lesson. That's fine. Totally acceptable. Okay. But again, if you just don't do any academics, I found my kids freaked out, like my older kids freaked out, and I freaked out. So I felt like that was bad advice of, don't do any academics. No, especially like teenagers, they're like, at the same time, they will resist. Like there will be a love-hate relationship. So don't be shocked if they're like, I hate this, but I have to do some academics, but I hate this. Like there is going to be this dance going on in their heads, and cognitive dissonance and all this crazy stuff going on in their heads. Totally normal. Grief cycle, totally normal. Anxiety, totally normal. You're totally normal. Do you have them do a little bit of math each day? Okay. As far as academics goes, just to take away some of your anxiety. Do you have them do a little bit of reading each day, even if that includes reading aloud? Okay. Read a little bit each day. Again, so you can check that box in your own brain that, yes, we are doing academics. No, I'm not going to die. Okay. Next, do a little bit of writing each day. So maybe you have them copy. In the homeschooling world, there's a philosophy called Charlotte Mason, and she was an educator from the 19th century. And she in part of her philosophy is that you had children. She would have children. She didn't have any children of her own. She was an educator, but she would have children copy passages out of a book so that they would see an example of good use of sentence structure, and she could point out the grammar. And so that's called copy work, where you literally have them copy sentences out of a book or out of scripture or a poem. They literally copy it down. Or you have them do narration, where they orally tell you like you read a story and then they orally tell you parts of the story back. Or you could do it in writing, where they write a synopsis of what they just read. And the other one is dictation, where you let them see the passage and then you take the passage away and then you read it slowly to them and repeat it while they write down. You dictate and they write it down, right? Have them do that a little bit each day. The younger they are, the less they're going to do. So like a third grader might be able to write a sentence, or a kindergartner might be able to write a word, whereas a high schooler might be able to write, several paragraphs. A middle schooler, like a paragraph, right? But sometimes you could even set a timer and be like, okay, we're going to write for 5 minutes. And then when the timer's done, you're going to stop where you are. You could even have them be like, okay, like yesterday I said to my daughter, I was like, we're going to do it. She's 8. I was like, we're going to do a free write. I want you to write about what a perfect day would look like for you, which really surprised me. She came back with an entire page of what she wants to do for her birthday, which would be a perfect day. And there was, in her free write, I was like, I'm not looking at grammar. I'm not looking at punctuation. I just want them to learn to love to write again. And there was literally no punctuation until the very end. There was a period, right? Because she's in 3rd grade. And I say that with air quotes, she's in 3rd grade. And her spelling was pretty stinking good. There was some spelling was off, but she was so excited to write that she would love to teleport and all this stuff. But you want them to get in the habit of learning to love to write. At first, there's going to be resistance, but again, a little bit, like 5-10 minutes tops. That's all. Read, write, do math so that your personal anxiety goes down. Now, again, there it is. Read aloud, do a little bit of math, cooking counts, have them write something each day. Write something each day, okay? And then you can check those boxes in your brains that you're doing enough. Okay. Now, if you are worried about the other subjects and you're freaking out, like, someone's going to come and get me because I'm not following the state standards, or I have to put something on their transcript, I'm going to vomit, and they need to do some sort of science, then watch a documentary, watch a quick video on that subject, read a part of a book about that subject. And it doesn't have to it doesn't have to be every day. You could do it like on Tuesday and count it good. All right. So that's something in the deschooling process. You are going to freak out. And so then just pop in a documentary and you can just rest assured in your head. Okay. We did it. Do's. Okay. Allow them time for sleep. That was one thing that shocked me, was how much my kids wanted to sleep, and sleep like 12 hours. They were so used to going to bed at 9 o'clock and then waking up like at 6 a.m. so they could be to school by 7:15. One of the things that experts have found is that children in the United States are grossly sleep deprived. And one thing that I was also surprised to learn is that during puberty, the circadian rhythm of children changes and they have a desire to sleep longer, and their bodies naturally want to stay up later, of which parents can work to shift that back to a normal time. But don't be shocked if they're perpetually tired and if they're sleeping until like 11 o'clock. Now, again, you can shift that as a parent and go, okay, you've got to go to bed earlier. I know you're not tired. But just be aware that they are sleep deprived already, and that their circadian rhythms as they're going to puberty is changing. So be thoughtful and aware of that, and show some grace to your kids. Now, that doesn't mean they have to sleep all day, and some of them are going to want to. You can still set boundaries, my friends. You're still parents. But do be aware that they will be tired, and it's totally normal for them to sleep. Also, limit screen time. Deschooling is not, I'm going to let you watch YouTube all day. That is not deschooling. That's just hanging out. Okay. Um, it's totally acceptable for you to limit screen time for them. Okay. Do allow for time to play. So as you're going in through this deschooling process where you're adjusting and you're removing the shackles off your own brain and you're learning and reading books yourself, that's one thing that you're going to want to do. You're going to want to read books about homeschooling and deschooling and education, what these things look like. So that's what you're doing. And you're learning about the different philosophies and what's out there and what resonates most with you. Some of the other, and then you're going to do those like 3 little things. You're going to read a little bit together, write a little bit, do some math, check those 3 boxes. You're done with your academics. Then you're going to allow for play and exploration and boredom, because boredom breeds brilliance. Some of the greatest inventions that we have in this world came as a result of boredom. You're going to play with them. You're going to learn together. You're going to play board games. You're going to play physical games. You might play video games together. You're going to cook with them. You're going to bake with them. You're going to go to the library with them. You're going to go to museums, and you're not going to take worksheets to those museums. You're going to go and just go to the museum just to go to the museum, right? And you're going to play, and you're going to get them in nature where they can release serotonin in their little brains because they're around trees. Who knew? And you're going to go on adventures together, and you're going to go on hikes and bike rides and museums and parks and to the library. And when a child asks a random question like, why do we have daylight savings time? You're going to say, I don't know. Why don't we look it up? And then you're going to learn together. Or when the child says, how does a cow have a baby? Then you're going to look it up together. And all of those things, my friends, count as learning. So when your state standards say that you have to have at least 4 hours of learning a day, or whatever your state expectation and law requires, all of it counts as learning. All of it. They're baking. It's learning. They're cooking. It's learning. They're working on a Crunch Lab box through Mark Rober. It's learning. They're watching an engineering Mark Rober video. It's learning. All of it counts as learning. We have to remove the shackle that learning looks like textbooks and worksheets and quizzes. That is a shackle that we have to remove, and it takes time to remove. You also need to expect that there are going to be hard days. You are going to be going through the grief cycle. It's totally normal. Don't be afraid of that. There will be days that they're going to cry and say, I think I want to go back to school. There are going to be days that they're like, my friends are going to prom. Expect that. Oh, and by the way, that was one thing that I actually mourned. Like, I found myself grieving over the things that my kids would miss out, like the homecoming dances, like prom, even though my prom was not great. Like, it was kind of lame. I liked my date and I were good friends, but it was like, we weren't boyfriend, girlfriend, we were friends, but it was kind of like, it was a lame dance. But my kids have actually gone, like my teenagers have now gone to homecoming. My son this year went to 3 different homecomings in 3 different school districts this year with public school kids, because the girls didn't have dates, right? So here I had mourned my kids missing out on these things, and then they didn't. But there have been, and there still are hard days. The month of February for all homeschoolers is a tough month because it's just the winter, and it's just longer. And in some areas it's really cold, right? There are going to be hard days, and you have to expect that not everything is going to be sunshine and sprinkles and unicorn farts. Okay. Like, there are going to be hard days. It's totally normal. There's going to be hard days with your kids. There's going to be days that it's going to be like pulling teeth to get them to do a little bit of math. And on those days, guess what you do? You put it away and you don't do it. And it's okay. It's fine. There's going to be days that your dog dies and you don't do any formal school work at all. And it's okay. because some days are hard and you can adjust and it's okay because you're homeschooling and it's part of your lifestyle. Okay. How does a child spell love? They spell it Time. They need you. They need your time, my friends. I love this. Last year, this mom started her homeschooling journey with her kids. Okay. And I had been working with her to help her transition her oldest daughter went ahead and graduated, but the rest she was pulling and she was really, really scared. And they went through the deschooling process. I said, Tasha, just do reading, writing, math. That's just, and a little bit. And then the rest of the time have them focus on the things that they want to learn about. Like, do they want, like this morning, my daughter wanted to build this structure for this thing that we're doing tomorrow night. And she spent 3 hours building this thing. Right. And I let her, right. She got her stuff done so fast. And I'm like, fine, not a big deal. Okay. This is the message that I got from Tasha. She said, we're easing into it. Okay. So they've just started the deschooling process like the month before they started. This is like late January. They pulled their kids right at Christmas. And she said, we're easing into it. So I've had to tell them that they'd be doing more as we get going and figure out what works and what doesn't. It was refreshing to sit down with my son, who burst into tears as he couldn't complete a math problem to get the right answer. It gave me an opportunity to love on him and help him get on track with his emotions more than the right answer. We just put it away for the day and told him we would visit again the next day. That is deschooling. That is homeschooling. That's what happens is when you can make adjustments and put things away if you need to. That's a shackle that we have to take off our brains, is that things have to be a certain way. They don't, and learning looks different for everybody. Okay, this is kind of a general rule of thumb. For every year that a child is in school, give them at least a month to deschool, at least a month for them to adjust. Now, for those of you that are pulling teenagers, you don't have as much time. And in many cases, a lot of the teens feel a lot of pressure. I've worked with a lot of families who pulled their older teens. And what happens is they're like, okay, I'm planning to go I'm applying for this college and I feel this stress and pressure to finish these classes or these things. And so what my suggestion for those, because you don't have time to just do read, write, math, right? Especially if they have to finish certain classes. So for the older teens, do the bare minimum of the subjects that they are required to finish for their transcripts for the universities that they want to get into, if that's what their plan is. Okay. So for example, one mom I was talking to, the son still needed a business credit. And he was 16 and he's like, okay, I need a business credit, I need a science credit, and I need this. And so what they ended up doing was watched science YouTube videos. And then for business, his dad is a businessman. So he got his favorite business books and said, okay, kiddo, we're going to read these business books. And he still had a math credit to finish. And so they actually just went through Khan Academy and finished whatever math he had. And he was able to get through school like in 2 hours a day. And then the son was like, "Oh, but I also play basketball. I play basketball for the public school still, and they're in Colorado. And so in our state, by law, homeschool kids are allowed to play school sports. Like they cannot be denied that. That's not the case in every state. But the son was like, okay, I knocked out the academics that I have to have for my transcript for the university I plan on going to, and now." Then he was able to spend like 4 hours a day while everyone else was still at school to work on practice. But he was like, I have to get through these academics. So for the teenagers, many of them will not have the opportunity to quite deschool, but you can find that you can grossly pull back the academics, and the academics don't have to take hours and hours and hours. So just be totally aware of that. Like if you have to check the boxes for the state, do whatever you have to, but again, minimum requirements during the deschooling process. Minimum amount of time, just enough so you like, okay, I did it. Okay. So give yourself and them time and grace. My friends, you're going to mess up a lot. And it's totally cool. It's okay. We learn through our failures. They're going to mess up, and it's okay. You are not going to screw up your kids. I promise. You're not going to screw them up. Be patient with them, and more importantly, be patient with yourself. Allow yourself that grieving time. Allow yourself to go through the grief process. Allow yourself to rediscover a love of learning with them and learn alongside with them. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to regain that love of learning. Okay, books to help you get started. Now, one I forgot to put on the list is Free to Learn by Dr. Peter Gray. I also had him on the podcast in November of 2024. So you can look that up. Fabulous. He is an expert in play and child development. He is a developmental psychologist. So Free to Learn, I forgot that book. Some good books for you to get started. Weapons of Mass Instruction by John Taylor Gatto. Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. Hold On to Your Kids by Dr. Gordon Neufeld. I've referenced all three of these already. That one's about attachment and attachment psychology. I wish I had read it as a young mom. Even in the public school system, I wish I would have read it. The Brave Learner by Julie Bogart. Y'all, that one's a super fun read and less heavy than the others. That one inspired me to be excited about the possibilities of homeschooling. So Brave Learner is fabulous. Unschooled by Carrie McDonald. She talks about the unschooling philosophy, but she also talks about like natural ways of learning. Super good. So those are some books to get you started that I highly, highly recommend. Those books help me start to remove the shackles off my brain during this very scary deschooling process. And then it started becoming really fun. The whole process became fun the more that we got into it and as I got over the grief cycle. Okay, y'all, you got this. Now, this was super long, almost an hour and 40 minutes. You got this. You have any questions, hit me up on Instagram, or we have a private Facebook page, School to Homeschool. You can go to my website, schooltohomeschool.com. You can email me. It is my email. I'm the one who gets it. schooltohomeschool1@gmail.com. But let's start the deschooling process. Now, part of the deschooling process is learning different philosophies and methodologies that homeschoolers employ to teach their children. And it doesn't have to look like public school, and children learn in the coolest ways, like at museums or hands-on. I took my kids to a sourdough bakery, y'all, and they learned science as this amazing 25-year sourdough baker taught them about yeast cultures, or like the cultures and what learning can be so magnificently fun. And you're going to discover that. And I'm so excited for you. So next video, you're going to learn about different philosophies. So, and it's exciting. I'll give you references so that you can start learning about those different philosophies, but start with the books that I suggested. I promise they're going to help you remove some of those shackles off your brains, and it'll make the deschooling process so much easier. It doesn't have to be a mutiny like it was for me the first day, right? We went back, we deschooled, and man, it's pretty exciting. So we'll see you in the next video. If you like this video, like it, subscribe, listen to my podcast. That will help too. Lots of references for you. I just want you to succeed. You got this, mamas and papas. You're going to do better than you think you are. We'll talk later.